What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we have a very special interview with the one and only Vincent DiSanti, the director of Never Hike Alone. As many of you may know, Vincent is moving on and doing a prequel to Never Hike Alone called Never Hike in the Snow, along with multiple other sequels to Never Hike Alone as well. We jump into all of that within this interview with him. If you haven't seen Never Hike Alone, you probably should go check it out. Link in the description. If you're a Friday fan, you'll probably enjoy it. But if you're like me, you also may have been critical of it as well and had many questions, which I also dive into within this interview. I can tell you right now, I have a lot more respect for Never Hike Alone now after sitting down with Vincent than I did before, and I can really see where he's going with it, and I can't wait for Never Hike in the Snow after this conversation. But let Vincent do the talking for you here. Check out this interview. I hope you enjoy, and make sure you follow Vincent on all social medias as well. But with that, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and enjoy the video.
My name is Vincent DiSanti. I'm a film director for my own company called Womp Stomp Films. We created the Friday the 13th fan film Never Hike Alone, also another short film Imagine, and the upcoming Never Hike in the Snow.
So Never Hike Alone is like really different. It blew up, all right, and it raised a decent amount of money. I think you were really the first person to go out of the way and get a good chunk of money to make a fan film. And you took a very different approach to Never Hike Alone. Like, what made you want to go down that road where it's really only one survivor, we're following one person, rather than just a large body count like what the trope became for Friday the 13th?
I think what it was, it started as a question, and it was, what happens between the Friday the 13th films? Who are the characters that go in and don't survive and never come out? And the original concept of Never Hike Alone was going to be to tell stories of characters that went into the woods and never came out and became a statistic. Because we always talk about, like at the beginning of Wolf Creek, you know, tens of thousands of people go into the forest every year and never come out. They go into national parks, things that are regulated by forest rangers, and they still go missing. So what happens to these people? And obviously in the world of Camp Crystal Lake, we know what happens to them, and let's tell their story. So Kyle MacLeod's story really started there, and the idea started really small, a 5 to 7 minute short about a guy going in, accidentally finding Camp Crystal Lake, and then getting brutally murdered. And when we shot the original concept piece, it was based on a script that I wrote for fun called March 13th, 1988. And it was supposed to be about a backwoods hiker who was on the Appalachian Trail, who was journaling in his notebook and talking about like his journey and like how he was like, you know, being one with nature and all this stuff. And then he gets lost and he's looking for the way back to the trail, and he finds his way through Camp Crystal Lake and journals his way there because he heard about everything. And I had taken that concept and married it to another concept that I had about somebody going through and like, what if it was social media? Somebody going through taking social media videos and things like that. And I realized that the concept of taking the journaling aspect and the social media aspect and making it more of a YouTube thing rather than like an Instagram story had a little bit more weight to it. There were films like 127 Hours, The Martian, that had a similar structure in which I thought I could build a film on. And originally it was like, again, it was only supposed to be 5 to 7 minutes, and we shot our original trailer based on that premise. And then we discovered that abandoned camp. And so that's when we went from, okay, this is a 5 to 7 minute piece that we're going to shoot out in the middle of the woods, we can probably do on our own with money that we're raising ourselves, to what if we could get 4K lights up to this camp and we could light it up, and I could go buy wood and I could build beds and tables and bunk beds and create Steve Christie's office and recreate the first Camp Crystal Lake in this new setting through a different lens. So it was almost like taking Friday the 13th and putting it in a different universe. In this universe, the way that this camp looked, and just kind of redressing everything. So it related back, but it wasn't in exactly the same thing. And so that's when we went to, you know, Kickstarter, and we raised our first $18,000. The first time we tried it, we actually tried to raise 40 and we failed. So luckily we ended up meeting an executive producer who gave us some money. I had some personal money that I put in the film. We shot the first half. Then it snowed on us and we had no choice but to stop. And in that time we said, I think for about 20 more grand we can finish this film. Went out, set the bar at 13, raised 18, scraped some more cash together, and just really just pieced it together. We were working 9 to 5 jobs. Well, actually, we were working animation, so we were in the office by 7. I was leaving 9 o'clock every night. On Friday, we had a rental van waiting for us that we'd hop in the rental van, drive out 2 hours to Big Bear, stay at an Airbnb. You know, we'd shoot Saturday, Sunday, drive back, return all the equipment, and go back, and we'd have 3 more scenes. We'd cut them together and be like, oh, you know what would be a really good idea is if we did this and this, we can actually pick this up, and this scene will go here, and I'll move stuff around in it. This 12-page script turned into a 20-page script, turned into a 30-page script, turned into a 50-page script. And so we just shot it piece by piece, and as we got more money, we decided what we were going to spend our money on. We knew we only had the one guy, and so we had to ramp tension up. And then to fill in the middle of the film, I thought the best idea would be, let's go down a trip down memory lane. What is something that I've always wanted to see in a Friday the 13th? Well, in Friday the 13th, 2009, we walked through the camp, but I feel like I didn't see anything. Everything was so dark. You see a couple things, and then Jason's name is on a bed, and you're supposed to say like, oh, there you go. Here's your trip through Camp Crystal Lake. And I wanted to take an audience on a real tour of Camp Crystal Lake, to bring back that nostalgia, to make it, you feel again like Camp Crystal Lake is like bigger than the world to us as fans. So I wanted to recreate that as kind of like the middle of the story. It's not only the story of this guy surviving in the woods, but it's a story about a place, and it's a story about what happened to that place and why that place is the way it is. And so I think that was kind of like, it all kind of started to bubble up, and different themes started to bubble up, and I just did my best to like focus it down, tell that story, and then deliver with the one-on-one action through stunts and effects and things like that, that kind of, even though we didn't have a lot of kills, the stunts and the action kind of took that place, and it was like, let's see Friday the 13th through a different lens now, a different style. And quite frankly, I didn't think it would work. I thought I was going to get like lambasted across like the whole thing, and people were like, there's not enough deaths, and I've seen it, but the positive reaction to it was, I did not see that coming. I was really just thought it was going to go up on Friday the 13th franchise.com. I was going to high five my team and be like, we got on franchise.com, and life was going to go on, and that was going to be it. But it obviously took a different route, and it's been kind of a wild ride ever since.
I think it's really cool to hear you talk about it in that fashion, because like I was one that like when I first saw it, I was like, God, there's just like no death here. Like, it's so different, and like hearing you explain it like that, I have like just a lot more respect for it, and the fact that you were willing to take a chance, knowing that it was a risk, I have a lot more respect for it, and knowing that it was your mindset going in.
Well, I mean, part of it was, going into it, if you had told me found footage, I would have been like, screw you. One guy, screw you. And I think because I had that outlook, I was always thinking like a fan, how do I satisfy that fan in me, even though I only have this? As independent filmmakers, our biggest challenge is we don't have access to things. We don't have access to sets. We don't have access to equipment. We don't have access to actors. Everything costs money, especially in Los Angeles. Everybody wants to be paid. Every location wants to be paid. So the fact that we stumbled upon a place that would let us shoot for free, that had amazing production value, and we had enough of a team that if we all DIY'd and built everything ourselves, we could build something a little bit more than what we had done in the past with other independent films that we had shot. So it was really about taking the resources that we had available to us and then stretching that production value out as far as we could. Like when we had that main room, like shooting in that main room, the way the sunlight comes through, and the way that we, took, like when we originally found the place, how we could design the interior and then use the boards to cut all the light that would come through to create the cool light shafts, and like just create something that was just production and camera sexy, and like making a Friday the 13th like look good, which, there aren't many Friday the 13th that are shot really that well. Part 6 is shot really well, Part 4 is shot really well, Part 3 is kind of a joke in a cinematography world because everything is about the 3D camera. Part 2 is shot really, really well, but a lot of them they're very standard, and I think that was one of the other things I wanted to bring to it was, let's bring a really camera-driven story here that, a bunch of pretty pictures are going to distract people enough where they see the camp in a way it's never been shot before. Especially the production design of the camp. The camp is much different than Novi Bosco, with everything being pointy and triangular and sharp and dangerous and broken glass. It was like, this is going to create a different mood, and that mood will create tension, and that tension will create suspense, and that's how we'll build it up when we finally pull the trigger on Jason. Now we've built all this up, we set all these things up, and it was a bunch of dominoes to knock down as we went through the end of the film of like, if you can last through the first 20 minutes and be okay with not seeing much, that you start to see that like, oh, all these things were set up, and now you're starting to see those things kind of piece by piece kind of unfold and unwrap, and I think that just comes down to like the fun of storytelling and telling a good story, and something that, you know, as you're going on, it keeps drawing people in and drawing people in until they realize that, like, wow, that 50 minutes just went by. Like, it felt like it just started. So I think that was kind of the goal with it.
When you were going through that process and the story kept expanding and getting more and more pages to your script, at what point did you know you wanted to move forward with like Tom Matthews? And was he always your first choice when you looked at that as well?
The original ending of the film, Andrew got his head crushed on the end of at the edge of the forest, and that was it. And that was it. And that was where it was going to end. And then a producer who gave us a good amount of money said, "You can't kill Andrew, I love him." And I was like, all right, I'll write a scene in which he survives. And so I wrote this scene that had an ambulance driver and the two paramedics, and it was more like it was an homage to part one where he says he's still out there, and they drive away. And there was a jump scare with the ambulance driver as like he's like flipping out and doing all that stuff, and you think Jason's breaking into the ambulance. It was one last jump scare and they get away. And halfway through filming, I had this scene, and I didn't know if I was going to film it yet. My EP, Barry, called me up and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm going on a dinner with Tom Matthews." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "Really? Just out of nowhere?" And he's like, "Well, I'm doing a business deal, and they know that I'm a big Friday the 13th fan, so they set up a dinner with him. It's kind of a birthday present for me. I'm going to mention Never Hike Alone." And I was like, "Please don't mention Never Hike Alone." I was like, "Don't embarrass me, please." And he did. To his credit, mentioned Never Hike Alone, and Tom was like, "Oh yeah, I'll check it out." Watched our first trailer. I'll meet this guy, I'll see what he's about. And we showed him the trailer that no one else had seen yet, the second trailer. And so he saw all of our new footage, all our drone footage, all the stuff that we had shot with stunts, the table break, all that stuff. And he was like, "Wow, this looks legit. How do I play a role?" I said, "Well, Tom, I've already shot half this movie, and I would love to make a movie just about you, but I can't. Like, I can't steal that much time from you. You're going to cost way too much money. I don't have the budget for you. But I think Tommy could be a paramedic, and I think that you could play the driver, and you could, instead of having a jump scare, we'll reveal you. And I don't want anybody to know that you're even going to be in the film. I think what's going to make this special is that we tell our own story. We win our own merit. We get our own story done. People are in it, and they've gone all the way to the end. They've really enjoyed the production value, the special effects, the stunts. They said, "Hey, wow, this is a lot better than I thought." And then you're the cherry on top, the thing that no one's going to see coming, and it's going to be very special for Friday the 13th fans. When you open that door, that's going to be a big moment for them because they've been waiting for you to come back for over 30 years. And he was like, "All right, I'm down with that." And so we started to talk about the paramedic aspects, and he started pitching me scenes that he had always thought of in Friday the 13th, and that became the stable for what Never Hike Alone 2 began as. As far as like, if we were going to do a sequel, where Tommy was, what he was up to, how it ties into Never Hike Alone, why he's a paramedic, all these different things, and it informed that scene. And then once Tom was attached to that scene, I started paying a little bit more attention to it, rewriting it. We had a version where Jason showed up and killed everybody. One of the original endings was he pulls Tommy out. You don't see what happens to Tommy. The other two paramedics die. The back gets open, and as we do that drone shot, it isn't it driving away. It was Jason climbing in the ambulance and buckets of blood just being thrown out the back of the ambulance as we're craning up and then going to Never Hike Alone. And it was kind of one that I'd come up with when it was still just the generic ambulance driver. When I showed that to Tom, he was like, "You can't kill Tommy." I was like, "I know, but I got to get kills in. How do I do it?" And so we kind of went back. We struggled for that for like 2 weeks. And then someone mentioned to me, they're like, "Well, what happened to Tommy?" I was like, "Well, he just got pulled out of the van. We don't really see what happens to him." They're like, "Well, then he's still alive." And then I came up with the idea of he climbs back in, he delivers the famous line, they drive off, and we kind of get this continuing story ending where it's like, this is just the beginning of a new tale. And I think that for me really resonated and made Tommy the hero. It gave us some deaths, and it was a good middle ground. And it was, it was that moment I realized, like, that's the ending to our movie. That's how we're going to do this. And I could see that whole sequence play out. And it was the last thing we shot, as far as like a big production thing. It was the last thing we shot in July. And it was amazing. I mean, there's Tom Matthews on set. I'm giving him direction. We're talking about scenes, but then like we're chumming it up. We're hanging out. He's hanging out with the cast and crew. I'm meeting his family. His kids are there watching him act for the first time in his entire career. And so it's been really cool. And that was the first thing he did in over 20 years. And now it's kind of been this little kickstart thing where he's doing more films. He just did Killer Therapy with Adrian King. Barry J., who was the EP on Never Hike Alone, is the director and producer of that film. I know he shot a Western, and we're obviously have more Never Hike stuff coming up. But I mean, he's getting more and more work now, and like it's good to see him back out there because he's hilarious and he has so much talent. And now that he's kind of getting back into the horror indie world and just the indie world, I think it's going to be great to see him playing these roles and doing new roles and coming up with new stuff because he's definitely one of our favorites.
Well, first of all, I'm jealous. That was a really cool score, especially the way it happened. Like it's crazy how I'm a firm believer in like everything happens for a reason, and the fact that it just came together and you guys were able to get Tom like that is awesome. And I think not telling anyone that he was in it was genius. And I think it does add a lot of credibility to what you guys were doing because, you know, people saw it for what you were promoting, not just because Tom Matthews was in it.
Yeah, we didn't want to put Tom on the front cover of the poster and then put him in for 5 minutes. Like, it's a big thing that, like, a lot of low-budget films do that. They get a high-price name, they put him in the film for 2 seconds, and then they just use them to promote the film, and then they're never in it. We didn't want to do that to the fans, and we wanted that to be a surprise. Yeah, I could have put him on our Kickstarter. We probably could have made $10,000, $15,000 more dollars, but the look on people's faces in that theater on night one when they had no clue, and some of the stories I've heard from people when they had no clue, and like watching reaction videos and people like jump back in their seat and be like, what? You know, it's like most of the original like fan mail I got was all about how like that blew their mind and they liked the film, but at that moment it was like the moment it like warmed their heart. And I think that the other serendipitous thing about Tom coming onto the film is that was the same week they canceled Friday the 13th, 2017, right after all the Rings debacle. So it was, for me, this sign that was like, Friday the 13th just gave up on its fans. This is the only thing going right now that is actually going to come out this year. We can come out on Friday the 13th this year and give the studios a big middle finger and give the fans a high five, and we don't need the studios this year. And it was kind of a pipe dream at the time. It was kind of like, if we do this right, this could be really big. But at the same time, we were like, but it's a fan film and no one will care. And so, because up until that point, there wasn't anything that really had been proven. The only fan films that were really out there that got a lot of notoriety were done by professional directors. There was, what's the director of Dread's name? Because he did the Power Rangers film. I always forget his name. But he did that Dark Power Rangers fan film, which was awesome. I mean, you had Dirty Laundry, which I think he did that one too. So you had this one guy who had the spare cash to make these films and the connections to have actual actors reprise their roles, or like Katie Sackhoff in a Power Rangers fan film. I mean, what independent filmmaker has access to that? So there was no proven fan film that had really broken the mold. And so we really didn't expect to, but we saw it like that kind of, we saw that mold crack. And so, and since then, the more fan films that have come in, it's like, it's been completely reshaped, and we're now redefining what a fan film can be and how it can be treated. And I think that fan films are getting more respect than they have in the past. And it's because people are actually saying, like, if I have a good story to tell, and I have a functioning production company that can at least shoot decent independent films, well, we can tell good stories about Friday the 13th. These are the stories that the studios are too scared to tell anyway. They just want to do the safe bet. They want to keep rehashing the same old stuff and not doing anything risky. These are the theories we've always wanted. We've been arguing on forums for decades about what we wanted to see in Friday the 13th, and we've all been saying, we want this, we want that. Well, now fans don't have to argue about it anymore. They can just go raise some money on their own and show people, this is my idea, I think this is where it can go. And it creates a great debate within the community, because now we have something to talk about, because we can talk about whether Part 5 is a piece of shit or not until the end of time, but the conversation has gotten stale 10 years ago. So now we're talking about new films that are made by fans, and those people are reachable. They're coming to conventions, or they're a Facebook message away. Like, literally, people are a Facebook message away from being in these films. So now fans are taking over the franchise, participating within the franchise, and having more fun with it than I think any other fan base out there, other than, say, the Star Wars and Star Trek fan bases, which did have a pretty good fan base out there. But in the horror genre, we really didn't have it.
So now I think you're doing something really ambitious now, where you're moving forward with technically 4 new shorter films, 3 of which are Never Hike Alone, 2, 3, and 4, really. And you're expanding more on that Tommy story. And like, when I saw Tommy as a paramedic, one of my first reactions was like, how did we get here? So like, how deep are you going with that story and explaining how Tommy became a paramedic.
We're not really going to like dive into the past and see Tommy going through like med school or anything like that. but but what I came to the conclusion was is that Tommy has faced a lot of trauma in his life. And I think that it's therapeutic for him to put himself in traumatic situations where he is now calm. Traumatic situations don't faze him anymore. He's actually the first person you want running into the fire when something's going bad. So by helping other people, by being there for other people, it's helped him deal with the trauma of him not being able to save his mom, not being able to save his friends, ultimately being the reason why a bunch of people died after part 6 because he had the balls to go dig up Jason. But we also wanted to delve into, you know, people say like, oh, well, it's all Tommy's fault that he dug up Jason. And I want to dig into, you know, it's not only you experience Jason and then you survive your movie, but you're cursed for the rest of your life. And whatever drove Tommy to dig up Jason is something that no one can understand because no one ever faced Jason like he did. You know, in part 5, they set up that he's seeing hallucinations of Jason. How much of that is PTSD or how much of that is the actual curse? Jason is haunting his ass and basically being like, come and get me, come and dig me up, come and destroy my body, come back to me, draw you back in. It's this curse that's drawing all of its victims back in, back to the center of the thing so it can finish what it started. And that was one thing I wanted to kind of dive in Tommy's story. So that's what we're going to really focus on is how the curse has affected him all these years, why he hasn't been able to leave Crystal Lake. Like one story point in the film is like people always ask like, well, what happened with him and Megan? And, you know, Jennifer Cook's not coming back to acting. She's made her life doing her own thing. She doesn't want anything to do with Friday the 13th. So instead of trying to shoehorn something with her and them, I thought, well, what's more of a realistic story? You know, she's going to want to leave Crystal Lake. She doesn't want to be there. Her dad died there. All these bad things have happened there. She's going to want to leave. But Tommy can't leave. He feels this urge to stay there and protect the town and be there if Jason comes back and do something about it. And that's something that she can't live with. She can't live with him going up to the camp and searching for Jason and doing all these things and putting himself in danger. How's he supposed to raise a family? How's she supposed to have a life? And eventually she left him. And that's this curse that he's been living in. He's punished himself all these years feeling that it's his responsibility to protect the town. But then you also have Rick Colon, whose best friend died on the night that he got locked in a jail cell and he couldn't do anything about it. And it's his town to protect. So you have these two characters that are at odds on how the town should be protected, and they've been fighting over it for decades. So Tommy got himself in a position where he can be there on first call to go out and see if anything happens, and Rick is his antithesis, and he's out there, and they're butting heads all the time. And basically one of them is like, we need to go up and deal with this, we need to take care of it and get ahead of it, and the other one's like, we don't poke the bear. And Tommy's ultimate message is like, I don't care how long you think you can protect this place, eventually some unseen thing is going to come along and disturb the whole thing. And that unseen thing is Kyle MacLeod in Never Hike Alone. And so Kyle MacLeod is this kind of fulcrum point in the story of Friday the 13th, where after years of silence, he is the thing that sets the new story into motion. So he's kind of like our Luke Skywalker, where he's the brand new person walking into a story that's already much bigger than himself, and we're learning about it through his eyes, but we're doing it with characters that have been dealing with it for all these years. And so we get to bring a new generation into it, but then bring the old generation in through their story, knowing the history. And then this new person who has to understand that now they've stepped into this world and now they are cursed and now they have to do something about it, or else they're going to be haunted for the rest of their life, just like Tommy.
That was a beautiful answer. Yeah. I do want to ask, Never Hike in the Snow is happening. You just raised a little over $70,000 with a $50,000 goal. And so, first of all, congratulations. That's awesome. But you're following what sounds like to be a single character again. How do you plan on making Never Hike in the Snow different from Never Hike Alone in a way that they can stand alone as two separate films?
Never Hike in the Snow is a much different piece. It started as really a 6-page kind of like, I just want to kill somebody in the snow and it'll be a lot of fun. Let's spill a bunch of blood. I was going to try and shoot it last year in secret, but I couldn't pull the funding together and I couldn't pull the team in time enough to get it all done. And then as I sat on the story and I realized I'm doing now because I originally wrote Never Hike Alone 2 as a feature script. And then I thought about, how am I going to produce this thing? This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then I said, well, Act 1's really doable, and Act 2's kind of doable, and Act 3, I don't know. We'll get there when we get there. And so I kind of had that story, and then there was this like fun snow stuff that we wanted to do. There were a lot of fan films that reached out to me. They were like, I need a premise. Like, what could we do? Like, is there something cool? And I was like, you should do a snow short. Like, if you do a snow short, that's like bullseye. You don't even have to try. Like, just spill some blood in the snow. Fans will be happy. And everybody was like, I don't want to shoot in the snow. I don't want to shoot in the snow. And then I finally said, like, well, I'll shoot in the snow. And so I wrote this, like, I ultimately wrote this, like, ridiculous kill sequence and was going to go shoot that and then didn't get to shoot it and then sat on it. And then, like Never Hike Alone, this story started to permeate in my head, and I started to think about some of the new characters in Never Hike Again, and Jason Takes Crystal Lake, and all the things that I was writing on that end, and said, like, how do I marry these two worlds together so it feels like an extension of the story of Never Hike Alone, as if I was writing a mini-series, and this is kind of this is one of the inciting incidents that kind of starts it. It's like almost like the warning shot. It's like after years of like Jason really getting away with murdering people left and right in secret, this is one that he can't hide the body. There's a bunch of blood left in the snow, and now it's going to permeate out into the town, and it's going to have an effect. It's going to have an effect on the police department. It's going to have an effect on Tommy, and it's going to have an effect on the person who is related to the person who is killed. And that's one thing in Friday the 13th we very rarely see. We saw it a little bit with Rob Dwyer, but the thing in part 4 that I really kind of gravitated towards was this one shot where you see a woman, and I think maybe like a sister, crying in a room and the doors closed on them, and realizing that this affects real people. So kind of this theme permeated out in Never Hike in the Snow of like how personal a kill in Friday the 13th can be, because ultimately we celebrate these deaths. We create ridiculous death sequences so we can laugh and cheer and do all these things, but one of the things I want to do with this film is say there's a little bit more to it than that. And we're going to explore how Jason has been able to remain secretive this entire time and how the inner workings of this town work. So by the time we come to Never Hike Again, you kind of know who all these characters are now, and you understand what they're dealing with and how they deal with it, so we can just go ahead and tell more story and just go ahead with more action and keep the story moving forward. So it's not just something to like go play around in the snow. It actually has like a really good message, and my goal with it is to actually be a really emotional and moving piece, which again, Never Hike Alone was something you didn't expect. And Never Hike in the Snow, again, will be something you don't expect out of a Friday the 13th. I'm not just going to go like, okay, now it's my turn to just go kill a bunch of people. It was like, what makes sense for the story? I'm going to do something that is going to fill that bloodlust that people want. But after that, I'm going to tell a really good story about these characters and then wrap it around and then maybe teach you something about Jason you didn't know before. It's always been there. It's always been on the surface, but there's something that kind of underlies his character, in which we're going to kind of grow Jason's character too. And you're going to realize that our Jason, the way that we're forming him, is that there's stuff going on up there now. I mean, when we saw Jason in all these previous films, he's woken up from his slumber, he's pissed the fuck off, he's murdering as many people as possible, and he gets put right back down. Well, now Jason's been walking around for decades, and he hasn't been put down. He's been living in the camp. And so how much of that humanity from the Jason that we saw in parts 2, 3, and 4 has come back? How self-aware is he? What does he feel about being immortal and not being able to die? How does that weigh on a person? And is Jason just as much cursed as his victims? And so it's kind of this cool dual story that we're going to set up of like Jason has an arc, Tommy has an arc, Rick has an arc, and then this new character that we're introducing has an arc. And they're all going to carry through all of the episodes as we see them all working together or against each other until it all kind of wraps around and their stories all kind of come together and they all have to deal with the ultimate problem, which is Jason.
Well, I'm really excited for it. The step to go into the snow is one that's really bold and hard, which is why filmmakers avoid in the first place. But I'm excited to see where you're going to take that, especially like story-wise and digging deeper into the mindset of Jason. I do have to ask, or I'm going to regret it, the look of Ghost Jason is one that I'm so conflicted on, because like I'm not a big fan of jacket Jasons, and then like there's something to me, don't take this the wrong way, there's something very hipster about Ghost Jason in his tight pants. Now, why did you decide to go that way? And then also with like having like darker skin and original hockey mask, like you could have easily just done a sequel one, but you took a more risky route.
I mean, I kind of started with a straight up one for one. I was trying reproduction masks and doing stuff like that, and then I started to think about, where does this fall into the franchise? Where do I want to branch off from? I want to create something new, and I think I was getting in a lot of arguments with people about the 2009 look and all the things I thought went wrong with it. And I'm like you, like I didn't like the jacket. Like to me, like I thought the jacket was something that could have been a good idea, but I never saw it executed properly. Like in 2009, I thought the jacket was too big, too bulky. It hid too much of his silhouette. So when he was standing in the darkness, he was really just this big blob with a head. You didn't see the outline of his body. And so, you know, I tried a Dickie shirt at first, and I'm not the most yoked out person. And when I was playing it at the time, I had just come off, I was fighting Muay Thai at the time, so I was down to like 190 pounds. And so I was kind of needed more clothes to bulk up. And I tried the shirt, and then I thought, like, what is something that looks like the shirt but could be a jacket, could be a military jacket? And I ended up discovering the M65 jacket, took it, stripped it down so it looked like a bulkier version of a Sears work shirt, and then said, I think this could work, and started to work with the color palette. We were out in that forest, so there's a lot of browns, a lot of greens. So I thought brown pants, green shirt, you know, green jacket, gray shirt, you know, get some military boots, and then started to kind of build a story around it. It was like after part 8, everything melted. Jason's mask melted, all his clothes melted. He did not turn into a little boy. That was a hallucination. He got washed out to sea, and he became basically a really pissed off tar man. So he's covered, like you can see his bones, like in part 7, you can see the bones, you can see the muscle, you can see all this stuff. And with Jason becoming somewhat self-aware, he wants to cover himself up. He doesn't want to see himself this way. It kind of internally freaks him out because in his head, he's still a 12-year-old boy. He's just following the voice of what his mother is telling him to do, and that's all his job. But at the same time, when he has time in between, he's kind of like, what's going on? And when we returned to Camp Crystal Lake, he was just basically pulling whatever clothing he could get together. I had this like other short that I wrote called The Defeated, Friday the 13th fan film, about kind of like a John Rambo like kind of vet who was wandering, found Crystal Lake, and actually found peace in his life, and didn't know that like the remnants of Jason was like trying to like regain its strength in this camp, and eventually it kills him and like takes all of his clothes. It's kind of like Terminator in a way. And then with the mask, I came up with a story of, in the 60s, they tried to reopen the camp, so they were bringing equipment. And so I was really infatuated with hockey masks from the 1960s era, and I started doing all this research on them. And I wanted something that had that texture, that had the weight, that had the creepiness to it, but still had the original design. And I approached CFX and I said, I want to do something a little bit different. And I showed them a bunch of masks, and we landed on something that was kind of like an in-between between the mask that I found and the original mask. And they painted it up and they did all the markings the way I wanted it. And they said, like, all right, what do you want to do for chevrons? And I was looking at it and I was like, you know what? I don't think this mask has chevrons. I think that if they did have chevrons, they faded off a long time ago. Like, this is supposed to be a weathered, old, beat up Jason. And I think it would be better if we went with no chevrons. And this will be kind of like our Roy-esque style to it, where Jason has the red chevrons, Roy has the blue chevrons, and our little fan film has no chevrons because we're not official. And it was like a little kind of calling card for us. And our kind of chevron is our little F on the cheek. And so it all kind of came together like that. And it was really just about seeing what fit him right, coming up with a jacket look that looked enough like the Dickie shirt, but had that cool things that the jacket does, because when he moves, it's got the cool swooshes and it looks pretty rad and it hangs pretty cool off the shoulders. And eventually, as I started working out and getting back to like 210, 220 when we started shooting, it started to fill out the costume a little bit more. And, you know, in a even further standpoint of that, it ended up really helping out when we had to do stunts, because we were able to hide pads really easy. We were able to pad up our stunt actor. We were able to hit him with a whole bunch of stuff and kind of do that. So it ended up working out in a production sense too.
See, again, hearing you explain it like that, I have a lot more respect for it. So I just have like one last question. Anytime I interview any filmmaker in general, I tend to ask a really open question that's hard to answer to finish interviews off. That being, if you could go back in time and direct or write any film, ever, and recreate it for your own way, what film would that be?
Okay, you know what I want to do is, it's going to be a little bit off the cuff, but it's superhero genre, but I don't want to do Venom. I want to do Agent Venom, the Flash Thompson one, the legless drunk who gets gifted this suit and has to deal with it. I think that if there's a story to be told that's like kind of like an unsung hero in the comic world right now, I think Agent Venom is is one that would do really, really well on a streaming service. I think that it's such a great story. You can pare down the look. He doesn't go full Venom all the time. I mean, he has more of the Spider-Man suit for most of it anyway. It's just a tactical Spider-Man suit. I think if I had a chance to tackle that, I would love to tell that story, because I think that there is so much story to be covered, and Andrew Lady would make a great Flash Thompson.
All right.
And I'm going to cut off his legs, which would be really funny to make him do all that stuff.
All right, man. If you got anything to plug, please do plug it. Any social media or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, make sure to follow us at Womp Stomp Films, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, www.wompstompfilms.com, WOMPSTOMPFILMS. The Never Hike in the Snow campaign is still in demand. We have Never Hike Alone 3rd Edition Blu-rays, pre-orders on the Never Hike in the Snow Blu-ray, which again, Never Hike in the Snow is probably going to be 20 to 25 minutes, but we're going to pad it with a bunch of extra stuff. We obviously came out with the Disappear music video a few months ago, which released on a Friday the 13th, which is still on YouTube. People should check it out. They should definitely check out the Womp Stomp Films YouTube. We also just recently released our first independent film, Imagine, which is streaming on YouTube. And coming up next year will be our film Pathosis, which we just finished. We're doing our festival run with that right now, and probably around Halloween next year we'll release it out to the public. And hopefully Never Hike in the Snow is done sometime this early winter, and we release it sometime in the spring or summer.